on your household. Just to compare some images of sprawl, what the impacts are, compared to maybe European cities that grew very differently than cities in the US. They're much older, so that's something the US is out of their control. As a result, they grew more organically out of a really high dense core dating back to the medieval times or even earlier. So it was high density from the start, which makes it much easier to run public transit. At the same time, most countries are denser populated to begin with compared to the United States. There's less open space, so cities are forced to build up early on, which really creates a very different settlement structure and experience as a pedestrian or somebody who lives in the city. And this map here compares the build-up area of Atlanta and Barcelona, and representing the same scale and then the metro line. So as you see, for example, Atlanta has 2.5 million people. This is from 1990, plus a lot more now. And Barcelona at the same time had actually a higher population, but if you look at the map, it's much smaller in size. And has so Atlanta build-up area over 4,000 square kilometers, and Barcelona just over 60 square kilometers. And the red lines are the metro lines. And you can tell, because it's so spread out, Atlanta, it's impossible to serve everybody with public transit there. It's just not economically viable. You don't get the ridership because of the low density. You would have need to put hundreds, if not thousands, of transit stops in there, and that's just not possible. Whereas in Barcelona, where everybody's much closer together, it's much easier to reach the public and get this critical number you need to run a public transit system. Then and sprawl can happen also rapidly, so often makes it very hard for city governments to react, to update zoning laws, to maybe to counter this movement a little bit, or to provide at least more options. So this is an image of Chandler, Arizona, 1984, and then in 2011, and you can see how fast the city grew and destroyed agricultural land uses, or at least changed land uses, and the built environment grew very quickly. Also, much of it is low density. And the same for Las Vegas as well. It's rapid growth, very hard to react. Oftentimes, cities relinquish some of their influence, sell huge quantities of land, big parcels, to big developers who then develop the land, not necessarily thinking long term, but building up the land quickly. We have this cookie cutter houses in some of those places, and in order to get to the next project, all they're interested in is selling and moving on. So there's not this long term strategy. Sustainability played very little. That didn't play a big role when designing those neighborhoods. And now we have this uptake on traffic, transportation and mobility needs. So just the consequences of sprawl, I talked about most of this already, but this is just to sum it all up before I move on to the next topic. So the reliance of the personal car, traffic, high cost of service provision, so that's what I meant when I said the uptake of infrastructure it needs to serve suburban neighborhoods. And I'm not saying suburban neighborhoods are bad, it's just that we have a lot of them. And oftentimes I think what I'm trying to say is that we lost the choices. We lost options as a result of this, and in many cases you don't have other choice than to live in those types of environments, although it's not for everybody, not everybody wants it. And as a result, there's intercity decay, segregation, isolation. There's a predominant design of those houses that we are now starting to better understand. There's a very great book called Native to Nowhere, written by Timothy Beatley, who goes into this, talks about this social impacts and isolation of urban sprawl. You drive up to your house, you have a 2-car garage, you park your car in your garage, there's probably a door that gets you into the laundry room or kitchen or whatever it might be, and you never really spend time in front of your house, so you don't get to know your neighbors that well. There's a lot of movement, people coming in and out of the neighborhoods because they're segregated by income. If you want to buy, because it might be your starter home and you have get a better job, have more money, or get children, whatever it might be, and you need a bigger house, most of the time it automatically means you also have to move out of the neighborhood. So it's really hard to build these long-term social connections. So it comes at a cost, the way we currently, or for at least for a long time, build those suburban neighborhoods. This homogeneous landscapes, everything looks quite the same. And as a result, there's a reduced sense of place. If people don't have a high sense of place, they don't identify with it, they don't take care of it as much. They're more likely to move, so there's instability in the neighborhood. And there's lots of farmland. It costs a lot of land, as you saw earlier, because those sprawling neighborhoods can grow really, really quickly. And often those developers build those houses before they're actually sold. So there might be also high vacancies that also hurt, especially in the economic downturn, hurts your value if you live in the same neighborhood of your house. And as a result, your retirement. So in terms of environmental consequences, your habitat loss, uptake in greenhouse gas emissions because of this transportation and traffic needs, which leads to climate change or contributes to climate change. Resource use, very resource intensive form of neighborhood design, and air pollution. Another aspect. So what can we do about sprawl? How can we fix this? How can we deal with some of the negative consequences of sprawl? Not necessarily not just in the sprawling neighborhoods, but what they left behind. So for example, strip malls. We see a lot of vacant strip malls because people moved away from this area. So loss of business. So they're vacant, they just sit there with huge parking lots that just really function as urban heat islands and are abandoned, are really an eyesore, drag down the property values of the areas around, and make it very, very difficult to re-energize those neighborhoods. Parts of it also zoning laws, remember segregation of uses, so those strip malls are zoned as economic zones. So it's very hard to do something else there, but there are now planning strategies coming to the forefront and are being applied, which think about sprawl repair. And in this sketch, for example, you can still see that it used to be a big mall with a big parking lot around it, and those are not the design ideas, which require rezoning to use those big lots. And provide new land uses in apartment complexes, for example, green infrastructure, parks, and really re-energize those places. So one big solution or idea to make neighborhoods more sustainable, even new developments, is to design with nature instead of destroying nature or just plan on top of them and changing natural landscapes so that those standard neighborhood developments fit. And we should now think about or make sure that urban form follows ecological functions, so make a really good site analysis, identify where aquifers are, where ecological values is, what is the best route for roads with the least impact, what areas have agricultural value, maybe more than others, so should be protected. So spend more time with the site analysis before starting building, and then build with the environment instead of seeing the environment as an obstacle, see it as an opportunity, just spend more time identifying suitable locations. Takes some more time, costs a little bit more money, but at the end, in terms of sustainability, and it's also in everybody's interest to protect agricultural land, protect waterways, aquifers, and it's worth it in the long run. A big movement is so-called smart growth, which is an approach to development that encourages a mix of building types and uses diverse housing and transportation options, development within existing neighborhoods, and community engagement. So it goes a little bit at the sprawl repair, reinventing old spaces that have been vacant for a long time, focusing on mixed use, public transits, and it's a bit more of a regional perspective, so it takes a broad view of this. It's not very strong on on architectural guidelines. It's more this bird's eye view, big impacts. So it's a response to the need to reform planning and land uses to make great communities happening. We now understand through polls and surveys and talking to people that families really care more and more how their communities grow, something that was really not regarded by big land use developing companies in the past. As I said, it's build, sell, move on. But it's more and more people are starting to understand and are linking growth and quality of life concerns together, so that they see that the ways neighborhood growth does impact quality of life if it's not done correctly. And so why do people really care? So there's an uptake in air and water pollution. It's more present in the media, so people think about this. Economically, it makes sense for many households since transportation budgets are larger than food budgets. There are equity issues in some of those master plan communities. There are very few housing choices and price ranges. And because of the separation of living and jobs and in some cases schools to a certain extent, there's really less and less time to engage with people in your neighborhood because you spend more time in the car, you spend more time to do your daily shopping runs or run your errands. And so there's less and less time for interpersonal connection and involvement, and people are missing this, and rightly so. So it's the smart growth is the idea to have a much better planned development that utilizes tax dollars effectively and provides more diversity for the community. And there are 10 underlying principles that should guide the decision-making process to really create smart growth communities, mixed land uses, more compact building design, a range of housing opportunities and choices, so diversify the housing choices so that people from all walks of life, different income levels can live in one neighborhood together, so that everybody has equal access to quality of schools. For example, neighborhoods should be walkable, so there should be alternatives to the car. You can still have cars, but if you choose not to use it, there should be an alternative there. It should be attractive neighborhoods, so make them look nice so that people develop a strong sense of place and are more likely to stay there, so it provides stability. preservation of open spaces, farmland, natural beauty, and environmental areas. Development should be directed toward existing communities, so the hope is that instead of doing greenfield developments on the outskirts of former agricultural natural land, try to find spaces in the city that you can redesign to create those types of neighborhoods. Provide a variety of transportation choices. In order to do that, you need this compact buildings, high density. Doesn't have to be everything apartment, but there should be different mixes of housing available that would provide that needed density for public transportation. Predictable, fair, and cost-effective development. So a transparent planning process. People who are interested in living in those neighborhoods should know what's happening there, why things are designed or planned the way they are, so that people understand it. This also creates public buy-in. People feel that their voices are heard, that they are represented in this neighborhood development, and as a result, people identify with the place, take ownership, take pride, and take better care of the place. And as I said, and this also leads into point 10. People should be involved in the design process of the community. So the idea is, and you're starting to see this with smart growth, the neighborhoods, that you have to remember this process, this idea of smart growth or new urbanism, which I'll talk about in a second. Those are relatively new principles, although they're based to a large extent of this traditional neighborhood design that existed across America pre-World War II in many places. Those smart growth neighborhoods or new urbanism neighborhoods are relatively new. They're often built in stages, so it takes a while for them to be completed entirely. So there's not that much data available of long-term benefits of those neighborhoods. We're just started to understand over the last 10, maybe 15 years, where we can have in-depth surveys with people who lived in these neighborhoods for long enough time to really think about questions like, so now that you lived there for a while, do those neighborhoods deliver on their promises in terms of sustainability, connectivity, accessibility, public transit? And you're starting to see that those neighborhoods balance the 4 E's much better compared to sprawl development. So the 4 E's are being the economy, environment, equity, and engagement. So in terms of economy, there are less costs for public service and transportation costs. You have less roads. The roads are narrower because you develop. Hopefully, that's sometimes really hard to do within the city limits of former sites of big strip malls, shopping malls, or industrial sites that are not too contaminated, that you can clean them up fairly easy. You already take advantage of existing infrastructure, so you don't have to build completely new one. You have less roads, as I said, so there's less serving costs, and there's better access to jobs and lower commute times. There's less air and water pollution, destroys fewer farms and open space. If it's done right in terms of equity, there's more affordable housing, creates better choices in transportation and housing. And because of those design guidelines of mixed use, public spaces, green infrastructure, parks, walkways, often those types of neighborhoods also don't allow parking in front of the house, but you have to park behind the house or in the garage, so that the cars are somewhat removed from the streets. That also engages or allows for more public engagement. Kids can play on the road, so there's more interaction, and it's more likely that people engage in civic life, especially when they were involved in the design process of the neighborhood to begin with, when they were asked early on, so hey, this is what we want to build, if you're interested to live here, tell us what you need, what you would like to see, those types of things. And so there's more engagement and often also healthier lifestyles. Something that's very similar to smart growth but takes a little bit more architectural focus is new urbanism. So it's a planning and development approach based on the principles of how cities and towns had been built for the last several centuries: walkable blocks and streets, housing and shopping in close proximity, and accessible public spaces. So you can say it's an important component of smart growth that promotes alternative housing types that many people prefer. So, but there's a strong architectural component in it. Part of it is because the people who thought of this or really pushed this new urbanism are architects. So it gives physical shape to the community. It's originated in the late 1980s, early 1990s. The goal was to reform all aspects of real estate development. Involves new development, urban retrofits, and suburban infill. So it's not just limited to infill inner city developments. That's also some of the critique of new urbanist communities, that they're often still built on green fields outside of the city, somewhat almost segregated. But still they focus on walkable, compact, mixed-use communities. There are over 500 new urbanism projects in the US alone, and half of them in urban areas. All other are basically master planned communities at the outskirts, but with a little bit more long-term thinking and often also a bit more expensive. So in terms of the principles, again, has 10 principles similar to smart growth. Has to be walkable, so when you design new urbanist communities, the idea is that everything is within a 10-minute walk of home and work. There has to be high level of connectivity, so small block sizes that disperses traffic on the grid network, and it's also easy to walk everywhere, so you're not caught in those super blocks that we have at many places now, where the interior roads are a little bit of a maze, and you often have to take a detour to get from one end to the other because there's not a direct line from A to B. Mixed use and diversity, mix of shops, office, apartments and homes on site, diversity of people, so allowing for different sizes of houses and apartments, so different incomes can live in the same area. Mixed housing, as I said. High quality of architecture and urban design, so emphasis on beauty, aesthetic, human comfort, that all create a sense of place, so that not everything looks the same. So it's not, so you really have this, you're presented with a very beautiful community, and where it's pleasant to spend time outside, front porch. Many of those houses have front porches so that the life spills out into the street, so to speak, and creates a sense of place that often other neighborhoods are lacking. It has a traditional neighborhood structure, it's a clear city center, public space at the center, civic art, contains a range of uses and density within a 10-minute walk. So there are clear transects, high density in the center, and as you go to the outskirts of those fairly small neighborhoods, density declines. So you have more single-family houses, maybe at the outer ring, but you provide all kinds of choices and options. So it's considered transect planning. So progressively less dense towards the edge and the highest density in the town center. But again, compared to other neighborhoods, there's increased density, green transportation, high quality transit connection to cities and towns together. So even if you're at the outskirts, those neighborhoods, the idea is that they're connected to the bigger city by light rail, by buses, by bike paths. So all those transportation alternatives, that if you choose not to use the car, that you're not penalized, that you can still go anywhere you want through public transit. Not necessarily all the time. If you don't have the time or don't want to, and you want the comfort of the car, that's fine, but you don't have to rely on the car all the time. That's a big difference. Sustainability plays a role when conceptualizing those neighborhoods. So the idea is to have to really minimize environmental impact, and it's in its development, but it's also in its daily operations. And if you do all those things, the quality of life will improve in those neighborhoods compared to others. And data shows that this is mostly the case, but there are some downsides to new urbanism, namely that sometimes it feels very artificial. It almost feels like Disneyland, like you're on a movie set. Because it didn't grew organically. It's still a master plan community in many cases, and often also on the outskirts, so it doesn't fulfill this goal to re-energize inner cities, doesn't necessarily repair the negative impacts of urban sprawl, those abandoned strip malls, for example, and often data also shows that it's quite expensive to live. So even though they have different housing sizes and apartment choices, it's still fairly expensive to live in new urbanist communities, unfortunately. So the social side of it is lacking, on the social equity side of it. Another interesting sustainable design movement that really is taking off in many places nowadays is the complete street movement. Complete streets are streets for everyone. They are designed and operated to enable safe access for all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, and transit riders of all ages and abilities. So to go away from this idea that roads are for cars only. Complete streets make it easy to cross the street, walk to shops, and bicycle to work. They allow buses to run on time and make it safe for people to walk to and from train stations. So one feature of complete streets, for example, and that's something that's missing here in Phoenix completely, and really hurts the public transit system, is dedicated bus lanes. So when you live in a city that suffers from high rush hour traffic, why would you use a bus when the bus is stuck in traffic just like anybody else? There's really no, except of environmental benefits and maybe some cost benefits, because you don't spend as much money on your gas for your car. There's no time incentive to use public transit, because as a bus rider you're just stuck in traffic just like everybody else. And then if that's the case, then you probably would rather sit in the comfort of your own car with your radio, air conditioning, and it's just more comfortable. And so in order to improve the experience of public transit and to really have a benefit of using public transit, many of those complete streets have clearly designated lanes for only public transit, so you have this time advantage during rush hour, and the buses can keep their schedule. You're not standing at bus stops and wondering when the bus is going to come. The cities can run a very efficient schedule because their buses run independent from those peak hours or rush hours. That's a very important point to make public transit more viable and more user-friendly. But overall, there's no singular design prescription for complete streets. Each one is unique and responds to its community context. A complete street may include sidewalks, bike lanes, or wide paved shoulders. Sometimes there's a space issue, so you have to look what you have, what you can do. Special bus lanes, comfortable and accessible public transportation stops, frequent and safe crossing opportunities. Median islands also help to control speed a little bit, make spaces more safe, accessible pedestrian signals, curb extension, narrower travel lanes, roundabouts, and other design principles that really help make roads more safe and more usable for everybody. But a complete street in a rural area will look quite different from a complete street in a highly urban area. But both are designed to balance safety and convenience for everyone using the road. And complete streets really help create livable communities for various types of users, including children, people with disabilities, and older adults. And they improve equity, safety, public health, while reducing transportation costs and traffic woes. And more cities are looking into that and redesigning their street networks to make it more accessible for all users. If you look at site level sustainable design strategies to make cities and roads also, but also buildings more sustainable, is the whole idea of reflective surfaces is becoming quite popular. There are big efforts in LA. Now Phoenix is running a pilot program in its couple of roads and parking lots and parks where they use reflective paint or coatings that reflects sunlight, reduces the heat storage of the materials so that we have less of a heat island effect. The surfaces stay cooler, so there's less surface temperature, which and especially if you do it on buildings, cools down the buildings a little bit more, so you need less energy for air conditioning. Less energy of air conditioning also translates to better air quality and less greenhouse gas emissions. However, there are often unintended consequences, and again goes back to this notion that for sustainability challenges there is no silver bullet. It's always place specific. You have to understand your surroundings, your needs, your opportunities, your resources, to really assess and figure out what makes the most sense. And what we are learning with reflective paint is that, especially for roads, yes, it reduces the surface temperature. So if you hold a heat gun to the surface, you see the surface is cooler than black asphalt, for example. So it reduces the urban heat island, surface urban heat island. But in terms of thermal comfort, so how people interact in the space, that is more reliant on air temperature, and surface temperature doesn't play that big of a role. But because so much solar radiation, or more solar radiation, is now being deflected and not stored by the material, the air temperature actually can go up. So you're creating a cooler surface, but you're creating higher temperatures maybe in the air, if it, especially in areas of the country where it's hot, like Phoenix, like LA. And roof workers also complain that they get easier sunburned because now they're hit by solar radiation from all directions. So it's this cool pavement cool coating and colors is a very good way to reduce energy costs for cooling, because it prevents structures to heat up. But it might not be the best solution for areas where there's a lot of pedestrians, like maybe like mixed-use developments where the stores are, cafes are, where people spend a lot of time outside. There you have to be careful with putting this reflective paints on the surface. But this is granted, this is relatively new technology, and there's still lots of tests of the chemicals and how the paints are put together, what color works, what materials should be in those coatings. So there's still a lot of testing going on, so this air temperature problem will probably be solved, hopefully, or be mitigated down the line. But this is just an example of unintended consequences where you think you have a really good idea, but it doesn't really work for all applications, and you have to be careful about this. Another site level design strategy is those green or solar roofs, using rooftops for urban gardens, green infrastructure that helps with flood protection, takes on, can like sponges, soaks up water. It also insulates the building, so you can cut back on energy use. And green infrastructure, plants, trees also function as carbon sinks, capturing carbon out of the atmosphere, so help you mitigate climate change. So that, and also improve air quality. We know the color green, this has a psychological impact on people, positive impact. So there's lots of benefits with green infrastructure, but you just have to be careful in terms of your climate conditions, that you plant trees that are native, that maybe that can survive in a hot climate without extra irrigation systems, because there's a threshold between the benefits of green infrastructure and water use on the other hand. So you have to balance those two, so that you don't create a more unsustainable situation at the end. Then you can, roads that are mostly impervious pavements, you can replace them with pervious pavements, especially on parking lots, as you can see on the picture here, where there are gaps or green spots, that again will help you with urban flooding. When there are heavy rainfalls, reduces the amount of material that can heat up during the day and then release heat during the night, so it also cuts back on the urban heat island effect. But there's a lot of benefits with green infrastructure. There are environmental, economic, and social benefits. So environmental reduces flooding, improves water quality because it filters water, provides habitat for animals, reduces the urban heat island effect because there are less surfaces that can heat up, mitigates climate change because they function as carbon sinks, and increases groundwater recharge because of this impervious surfaces. This water, there's not as much water runoff that just disappears in the sewer system, but instead this can be filtered, cleaned, and recharge groundwater. Economically speaking, because it reduces flooding, it also avoids flood damages to an extent. With drought-tolerant plants and passive rainwater harvesting can reduce landscape maintenance costs, increases groundwater resources. This has also an economic, not just an environmental benefit, because it reduces water imports and also increases water security, and reduce energy use for transporting water and cooling, because more infrastructure, especially green roofs, for example, improve the insulation of buildings. From a social point of view, improves public health, improves air quality. Big parks or patches of green infrastructure, especially dense green infrastructure, function as cool islands. So the plants basically sweat in the heat, and this evapotranspiration then also cools down air temperature, and so this can be a lot cooler in those green infrastructures, in those parks, for example. But this cooling effect also extends to not very far, but to a certain extent outside of the park. So even if you are across the street from a park, you can still feel the cooling effect of that green infrastructure. Beautifies neighborhoods, so increases property value, so it's a smart investment choice. But also leads to more community cohesion and social capital, because if you create high quality public spaces with green infrastructures, people are more likely to use it and spend more time there, interact, and it has this water buffering potential.